All right, let's climb into the cockpit and figure out what it really takes to become a pilot. It's a journey that's all about discipline, precision, and a whole different way of thinking that starts way before the wheels ever leave the ground. So I gotta ask, have you ever looked up at a plane and just wondered what's really going on up there? Beyond the cool image, what does it actually take to master the art of flying? Well, the answer is probably more fascinating than you think. Okay, so people love to say learning to fly is like learning to drive. But honestly, that's not really accurate. Driving is pretty much a two-dimensional world, right? Forward, back, left, right. Flying adds that third dimension, up and down, and that changes the whole game. It demands a way deeper understanding of, well, everything. And that leads us to this really core idea. See, becoming a pilot isn't just about learning how to move some sticks and pedals. It's about developing a whole mindset, a philosophy even, that everyone in aviation calls airmanship. So what in the world is airmanship? Well, think of it as this potent mix of three things. First, you have to know how flight actually works. Second, you need the skills to fly the plane with total precision. And third, maybe the most important part, is having the sound judgment to make safe calls every single time. It's the whole package. And that big idea of airmanship really breaks down into four skills that have to become second nature. There's coordination, using your hands and feet together smoothly, timing, doing the right thing at the exact right moment, control touch, which is kind of like being able to feel what the plane's telling you, and speed sense, just having this gut feeling for the plane's energy. But here's the thing, a pilot's airmanship isn't built in a bubble. It's created inside this huge interlocking system that's designed for one thing and one thing only: safety. You are never, ever truly alone up there. This whole system basically stands on three pillars. You've got the FAA, setting all the tough safety rules for everything. Then you've got your flight instructor, whose job is to train you to meet and beat those rules. And finally, there's the designated pilot examiner. Think of them as the final gatekeeper who makes sure you're truly ready. And your instructor doesn't just throw everything at you at once. The training follows this really smart building block method. Every new thing you learn is built right on top of the last skill you mastered. A turn builds on flying straight. A climb builds on a turn. You get the idea. It's this logical, step-by-step process. So why all this structure? Why so much focus on judgment? Well, here's a stat that'll stop you in your tracks. The National Transportation Safety Board found that something like 85% of all aviation accidents boil down to pilot error. That one number tells you why this system and the pilot's own discipline are just so incredibly critical. And that discipline, it starts long before you're even thinking about takeoff. I mean, one of the most vital parts of any flight is the careful prep work that happens right there on the tarmac. A safe flight always, always begins on the ground. Before every single flight, the pilot in command is legally on the hook for deciding if the plane is airworthy. And that's a two-part test. It means the plane meets its original design specs, and it's in safe shape to fly right now. The buck absolutely stops with the pilot. So how do they do that? It's this methodical, three-step ritual. First, they dive into the aircraft's logbooks to make sure all the inspections are current. Second, they check that all the required paperwork is actually on board. And third, they do a full, hands-on, walk-around inspection of the entire airplane. This discipline even extends to how you talk in the cockpit, especially during training. There's this unbreakable three-step process for handing over control of the plane. The instructor says, "You have the flight controls." The student says back, "I have the flight controls." Then the instructor confirms one last time, "You have the flight controls." That way, there is zero confusion about who is flying the airplane. Okay, so the plane is airworthy, we're all clear in the cockpit. What's next? Well, now it's time to master the four fundamental maneuvers that are literally the foundation for everything else an airplane can do. The key concept here is something called attitude flying. What it means is that a pilot's main point of reference isn't their instruments, it's the world outside. You control the plane by managing its attitude, basically where the nose and wings are pointed in relation to the natural horizon. To get this right, pilots are trained on what you could call a 90-10 rule. About 90% of their attention is supposed to be outside, looking at the horizon, controlling the plane's attitude. The other 10% is for quick glances inside at the instruments, just to confirm that the plane is doing what they think it's doing. It's a constant loop. Look out, adjust, peek in, confirm, and look back out again. So, what are these big four fundamentals? They actually sound pretty simple. You've got straight and level flight, turns, climbs, and descents. But mastering each one is its own art form. And every complex maneuver, from takeoff to landing, is really just a precise mix of these four basic building blocks. Now, speaking of turns, let's bust a myth. When you see a plane bank into a turn, what do you think is actually making it change direction? Most people immediately think of that big fin on the tail, the rudder, right? Kind of like a boat. Well, that's not it. Here's the big reveal. The rudder doesn't steer the airplane in the air. The force that actually pulls the plane through a turn is lift, the very same force that's holding it up. So here's how that works. First, the pilot uses the ailerons to bank the wings. The second those wings are tilted, the total lift force, which always pushes straight out from the wing surface, gets split into two parts. A vertical part still fights gravity, but now there's a horizontal part that points toward the inside of the turn. It's that horizontal piece of lift that pulls the plane around. So then what is the rudder for? Its main job is to keep the turn clean and efficient. See, when you bank, the wing on the outside of the turn actually creates a little extra drag, and that tries to pull the plane's nose away from the turn. That's called adverse yaw. The pilot uses the rudder to cancel that out and keep the nose pointed perfectly through the turn, making it smooth and coordinated. And that really brings us to this one quote from the FAA's own handbook that perfectly sums up the discipline of flying. In an emergency, your gut instinct might be to pull back on the controls, to try and stretch your glide to make a runway. But that's the worst thing you can do. It actually creates more drag and makes you land short. A pilot's job is to ignore that instinct, trust the training, and fly the plane by the numbers. So, from the mindset of airmanship to the pure physics of a turn, the entire journey of a pilot is about replacing gut instinct with rock-solid knowledge and precision. After hearing all that, what's the one part of this whole meticulous process that you find the most surprising? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in.